Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we have another opening video for you. And today we're going to look at the Smith-Mora Gambit. And of course, I'm going to be advocating it for white. No, spoiler alert, the Smith-Mora Gambit's awful. And I'm going to be suggesting for all you Sicilian players how to score many points with black for players who are ill prepared and will play it against you. Again, so we'll dive right in. E4, D4, E4, C5, D4, CD4. Here, I think the objective best move might just be Queen D4, and just admit that D4 was kind of a mistake. Knight F3, trying to transpose back to the open Sicilian is interesting, although black can play E5 because, of course, if knight takes E5, Queen A5 check picks the knight up. But we're not gonna cover that. So C3, and we're not gonna play knight F6. We're not gonna play D3. We're gonna take the free pawn. So, or almost free pawn, I should say. I think if white plays very accurately, white can maintain equality. Perhaps, I'm not sure. Knight C6. So knight C6 is the main move. Knight F3. And then here, black has to make a choice. So the E6, Knight G7 lines are pretty interesting, and they're pretty popular with grandmasters. I'm going to recommend something else. I'm going to recommend a line that was invented by Grandmaster Larry Evans, and is for years and still today is one of the biggest tests of this gambit. So D6, Bishop C4, A6. So A6 is a really important move because, well, like lots of Sicilians, you want to control the B5 square, and counterplay against D6 is a little more amplified in the Smith-Mora for a couple of reasons. One, the idea of pressuring D6 along the D file is better because the knight's on the knight is on F3 instead of D4. And that also, because the knight's on F3 instead of D4, the bishop can come to F4, and that's not going. And E5 is not going to fork these two pieces on F4 and D4. So you have to be a little more careful with your D6 pawn than in normal Sicilian lines. And so A6 can be especially important. So castles. Okay, so here critical key move on knight F6. We don't want to play E6 because we want to reserve the option to play Bishop G4 depending on what white does. So knight F6, and here is really where it is decision time for white. There's three main moves. There's H3, Queen E2. Well, there's really four main moves. One of them is really bad, which is Bishop G5, which we will see a game with Bishop G5. Even Smith-Mora people will admit now that Bishop G5 is just really bad. Although we'll see the canonical game with Ken Smith versus Larry Evans from San Antonio, 1972. There's Bishop F4, which has been claimed by some that, white is actually okay in this line, which, again, whenever you're saying the words white is okay, that's no. White's playing for an advantage, not equality. So, all right, so maybe Bishop F4, and, white doesn't lose because he's down a pawn. Okay. That still doesn't make the opening good, right? Okay, so there's Bishop F4, which we will cover as the main line because while it's not the most popular move, I think it is the objectively best move. And there's Queen E2 and H3. So let's look at Bishop. Let's actually look at the sidelines first just because they're shorter. So Queen E2, of course, Bishop G4. And our idea here is to play knight, or shift to do the arrow. idea here is to play, is it shift or? It's alt, is it alt shift? No, that's with squares. Is it control? No. Chess base, I mean, no. I mean, chess base is garbage. I mean, I'm just going to say that. I'll get in trouble for it, but maybe, but it's just, I mean, come on. This is ridiculous. Like, I've never used it without getting somewhat frustrated about all it's good for is searching for specific positions and maybe creating some PGNs, but there's nothing it does that free programs don't do. And then look at this, like now we have to put up with this, like why is this just sitting here? Like I don't want that. How do I get rid of that? Delete color commentary, I guess. Okay. So the idea here is of course to play knight e5, which pressures the pinned knight. So white needs to make a decision. H3, of course, to unpin the knight. Bishop f3. E6. You don't have to rush to play knight e5. Knight e5 actually allows white to kind of escape. Rook d1. Yeah, the problem is he's threatening e5, so queen b8. And you got to let him take on d6. And okay, so white gets to play an equal endgame. All right, so I want to play knight e5 because I want more. So e6, rook d1. Now queen b8. Well, I'm threatening knight e5 again, so bishop e2, knight e5, and just b5. And white has a bishop pair, but that's not enough. And you know, black's knights are pretty good. This knight on e5 is pretty good. I can come into c4 in some variations. So this is just clearly better for white, or for black. Rook d1. Bishop f4 was tried. Bishop g5 is going to transpose to the bishop g5 lines. So bishop f4. So now knight h5. Knight e5. b5. You don't actually have to play b5. You can play this. Check and just play king e7. And this is much better for black as well. We'll see an example on one of the illustrative games is going to see this position, but it's technically a little more accurate to play b5. And now rook b8 exclam, which is a computer move. The idea is just overprotect b5 so that when so there's no sacrifices here. And the threat here is just now bishop f3, gf3, queen h4. And then there's no nonsense with knight b5 and check and forcing the king to move. And so afterwards, black can just play bishop e7 and castles and bishop g5 and just eat white alive on the weaknesses on the king side. So we'll see what that looks like. Knight b1, trying to get knight bd2 in, but queen h4. And knight f4, and I mean, this is just end of discussion as far as who's better. These really menacing knights, tons of weak squares, and like I'll even give white his c pawn back, and I think white's still dead lost. I think black's position is that good here. So queen e2 is not something you wanna play around with if you're playing white, but you really don't want to play around with 2d4 either. So there's h3, but then there's a very clever defense, which is called the Chicago defense for some reason. Queen e2. You use this kind of slow. You use this extra tempo. Now you play rook a7 again. one really common theme for white in this opening is try to pressure the d6 pawn down the d file, and because the knight's not on d4, if you can get rook d1 in, you can threaten e5 and bishop f4 and that kind of stuff. So actually you don't have to. I have a comment here. You don't have to, and you don't have to go into the Chicago defense. There's just bishop e7 and then knight d7. And again, this is a way to neutralize the pressure on d6 because we're just overprotecting e5. And when the inevitable rook d1 comes, well, knight c5, knight b3, and just d5. And there's no issues here. If knight b5, that doesn't matter, just castles. Knight b4. And black has better pawn structure, protected pass pawn, is effectively up a pawn because these pawns can't move. We can play a5 and bishop a6. This is better, much better for black. If you're fine, or for completeness sake, I cover the Chicago defense because it's a very extravagant idea. One of my first big wins against I was rated or big upsets, I guess I should say. I think I was rated around 12 or 1300, and I played 1801, and so I played this line. So the reason I say fireworks is obviously I'll show you the game. I think I have it even cited here. So if white does nothing and just plays normal moves, he's going to end up just with no compensation. That's kind of what my opponent did. So rook ac1. This is my game. Bishop e7. And at this point, what does white do? He doesn't have anything, right? There's no pressure on the d file. There's no one thing I should point out is rook a7. He played rook a7, made a funny look and played bishop e3. I still remember the game because it was such a big upset for me. I think I was 13, about to turn 14, and I kind of just started playing rated chess. Maybe 6 months ago, 6 months before. I'd always been chess club in school, but. So he played bishop e3. So the key thing when you play rook a7, if he can bother this knight with rook c1, you don't have to line it up and have to deal with discoveries. You don't have to play bishop b7 because then rook a7 doesn't make any sense. So you want to make sure you can get rook d7 in first before this knight comes under fire. Rook ac1 and now bishop b7, guarding the knight. Rook is safely on d7. And so here he just didn't know what to do because he has no compensation. So he played rook d2. Played knight a5, bishop f3, played gf3. I don't know why he didn't take with the queen. Maybe he's worried about not getting this pawn back, but he's not going to get this pawn back. Knight b3, knight d7, rook d1, and just simply queen c7, and I'm one move away from castling. I'm up 2 pawns, and here I'll use it's Control Alt Shift is red squares there. Boom. Red because it's a red flag and really bad pawn structure, right? So that was a game on mine back in 2004. I said, I think it was before that actually, but so anyway, black needs white needs to say, if white just makes normal moves, so white needs to do something big, so he has to sack a piece. And here, black needs to play somewhat accurately to consolidate the extra piece. This knight's under, so bishop b7, guarding the knight, and then bishop e7. There's no way to guard this effectively. If rook c7, then bishop b6. Castles. And it's hard to save this rook. If he retreats the rook, we get to take on e4, then take on f3, and he's going to get into trouble. d8. And rook c7, and white is up in exchange here, and these pass pawns are far enough back that we can actually get an initiative against them. So, or black is up in exchange. So, I might recommend bishop e7 just because this seems to give you a pretty stable advantage with this idea of knight d7. Just neutralize the e5 push and the play on the d file. I wonder if here, if you could play knight e5. No, he just takes. Okay, knight c5. Yep, and if e5, just knight b3 and d5. So you may be asking, so the idea with knight d7 is just so that when e5 happens, it's not hitting this knight. That makes sense. Okay. So that's h3. So, well, bishop g5 was the main move for a long time. But e6, queen e2, h6, g4, bishop g3, knight h5. Very, very extravagant. Black has moved a lot of pawns. The issue is white has no profitable way to open the center. e5 is going to lose a pawn. And white has these two center pawns, and they kind of keep all of that control all these key central squares. You know, that the black pieces would try to get into, right? There we go. Can't, like there. See, right? Where are these pieces going? Well, they can't do anything, right? All the entryways are covered. So black can't really do anything properly with his pieces because these key center pawns control the squares. And so black can kind of just start playing on both sides of the board. So we are going to see this game in its entirety, but I will, that's a quick preview on bishop g5. All right, so that's about it. There's a minor line with b4, but that's not good either, and I don't want to cover it because there's very, very few games. I don't know how many. Let's see how many games with b4 there are. There's 11. So the thing, you can't actually play knight b4, but you just let him play b4, b5. It's just too slow. So the idea is that, oh, I get to get my knight to b5 and harass your d6 pawn anyway. The issue is, well, I don't have to actually, if you're going to be that slow, I don't actually have to move my e pawn. I can kind of just play a dragon setup with g6 and bishop g7, and then the d6 pawn is secure. So it's not, it doesn't work. Okay, so let's go to bishop f4. And this is supposedly the saving grace, but if you want equality, easy equality, you can have easy equality. If you want more, you can play for more. So bishop g4. So in Mayhem in the Mora, which is by Mark Esserman, and I would actually highly recommend the book, not because the opening is good, but because it just shows lots of crazy chess games. And yeah, maybe like black played poorly for the first 10 moves, but if you just were to like ignore the opening and look at the crazy chess games, it's like, wow, this is like some really interesting tactical chess, and you could really learn a lot and sharpen your game up. And you know, you're not going to learn anything useful about the opening, but you're going to be like, hey, you know, there's lots of interesting ideas that, yeah, they were allowed because black played the opening poorly, but the book is called Mayhem in the Mora. The book is not called Play the Smith-Morra Gambit, right? So, okay. So, Esserman nonetheless calls this move bishop g4 somewhat, he calls it dogmatic, because obviously the idea of bishop g4 in the other lines was to get this knight e5 move in, and well, now the bishop is, there I have the technology to do that, right? So, you know, if knight e5, bishop f4, right? or if knight e5, bishop e5 potentially, right? So this trying to exploit the pin is not as effective, but bishop g4 is still pretty good. So h3. Quick thing of queen b3, thinking of forking up this stuff. It doesn't work because e6, queen b7, knight a5. Okay, queen b4 is forced, only way not to lose the piece. Then key move e5 exclam, so that, I think I can do it like that. So they're green arrow because it's the black pieces, or we're advocating for black. So that in the event of d, because we want to play d5 in order to uncover this, right? But when we play d5, when queen a4 check happens, well, then the queen escapes the attack, and then white can move his bishop or deal with what's going on d5, right? And so we want, when queen a4 check happens, we want to be able to play bishop d7 so that we are, boom, make it in red because it's a red flag attacking the queen that's going to be on a4 check. All right, so e5, bishop e3, now d5, and now if queen a4, there's bishop d7 check. If you don't play e5, if you just play d5 here, you can play check, and now you have no way to attack this queen. And so now you get out of check, and then black deals with white deals with what's going on e5. So d5, give me your piece for free, and it is game over. So queen b3, while it looks very threatening, doesn't work. h3. So you have a choice here. Bishop f3 is going to lead to a flat equality. Queen b8. And then there's this really funny computer move, which is bishop e2, which it does like a number of things. The first is that now knight e5 is less of an issue. The second thing is that it eyes, so like one thing that white wants to do to try to recover the pawn is play queen g3. See how it's giving me knight h5 to put that battery on d6, but it's going to be met by, again, we're the good guys, so we're in green. Maybe I can even flip the board. Knight h5, forking up these pieces. So bishop e2 not only gets out of like knight e5 hitting the bishop in some lines, but also guards the h5 square, so that when queen g3 happens, you can't play knight h5. So bishop e2 looks like a really, it's a move that only a computer, or humans could find it too, but computers are really good at finding, because it's not, humans, we have like this bias that you always want to move forward, and computers, don't see retreating moves as actually having offensive potential, and bishop e2 is actually, it is not only defense, it's hard to find moves that are both defensive and offensive. This is an offensive move because it prepares queen g3. It's also a defensive move because it makes knight e5 less, it's not gonna hit two pieces anymore. It makes it less powerful. So black has no way to keep the e5 pawn. Bishop hitting this. I mean, if you don't play bishop e7, what are you gonna play, right? Knight d7 may be a thing, but my intuition, gut tells me that's going to be real problematic. So castles and rook d8, and we agree to a draw, right? But so you can play bishop f3. It's going to lead to a draw. But instead, you can play, if you want more, you can play bishop h5. And this is where I say I kind of believe that white may be equalized here. I'm going to show you the final position. Queen b3, queen b8. don't want to play queen b8. Queen b8's not good. How did that get hidden here? Why does that give? It's supposed to be a question mark, or dubious. So, all right. I'm gonna promote this variation. Queen b8's not good. Queen b8 allows a move like rook a d1, and it's hard to develop because you can't play e6 because there's too much pressure on this pawn. So queen d7, just guarding the b pawn. Let's get rid of this variation. There's also e6. Castles. This is a perfectly fine way to play. You know, it's equal material. White is a better pawn structure and a safer king. I'm saying it's perhaps only a little bit better for black. That might be relying too much on a computer evaluation that thinks that it's not. I mean, for practical matter, is black is just gonna have better chances here. So queen d7. If you want to keep the pawn, you can play queen d7. You're defending this, and you're threatening knight a5, because queen a4 is not check. Bishop e2. Knight d4. Check. e5. Bishop f6. Knight d5, bishop d8, and yeah, he has a pretty knight here, but black's position is going to improve very rapidly. Rook 8, and also this knight itself is shielding the d6 pawn. So rook a d8, or rook fd1, rook c8. You could also castle first. Castles, and rook c6. And black has the idea of playing bishop b6 and to d4. He also has the idea of playing f5. He also has the idea of playing, yeah, so with those two ideas, black is actually better here. So for example, if this knight moves away, we can probably get our bishop out like this and then play like f5 and fe4 and try to go over to the f2 target. If the knight just sits here, we're going to play f5 anyway. You know, black is going to fully unwind, and white's position has reached its maximum, and he doesn't he can't really improve his position anymore. Whereas black has active ideas to improve his position and retain the extra pawn. Okay, so that is basically the theory. In key position is this. I guess I'm going to cover e5 because people have played it against me for whatever reason, but e6 and this endgame is just nothing. You know, just natural moves are enough to get an advantage. So okay. All right, so let's look at the theory. I guess I'll save this. Okay, so we're going to see the canonical Smith versus Evans game. D4. I even give this a question mark. We can kind of because I'm being a jerk, but also because I'm just right. I mean, white's. I would if I were given this objectively, if I were given this position as white, this is the best way to go is to just admit your mistake and play queen d4. D6. a6, knight f6, and Smith played bishop g5, which was the main choice at the time. e6, queen e2, a game of mine that was kind of ended in a comedic manner. Went queen d2. I just played the same thing. Rook 81. Bishop b3, h5. This is exactly the way or Evans played, except for the white queen was on e2. And I thought for a while to make sure that it all checked out. Actually, and then my opponent just played queen f4 here, which just loses the queen to bishop h6. So, I guess there's a sub variation like f4. I've seen this before online, but just g takes, h4, bishop h6, and white's dark squares are just collapsing. Bishop f4. And this pawn is a nuisance. I can complete my development with bishop d7 and start pushing my b pawn. So, all right. So Smith played queen e2, h6, bishop h4, g5. If they play bishop f6, you're very happy. You just play queen f6, and now the pressure. Okay, bad guy is red arrow. On the d file is gone because the queen's on f6, right? So one key thing in the Mora is that also the black queen can sometimes have trouble finding a good square, because if it stays on d8 under fire, if it goes to c7 it's under fire. If it goes to b6, oh, no. Control. I can do that. No, I can't do the undo. What if I try this? What if I try? There we go. Can't put arrows on top of arrow. If it goes to b6, then it can be in trouble from this bishop on e3. And a5 is sometimes also not a stable square. So this queen has a hard, and obviously e7 is it's fighting over that square with the bishop. f6, it's fighting it over with the knight. So that's one issue in the Mora, is the black queen can sometimes have trouble finding a good place of employment, so to speak, or a safe square. So bishop f6 just takes, and there's no more. F6 is a fine square for the queen because it's not vulnerable. So knight e5, and even just queen e5. And you can play g5, and just the e5 square is just a really powerful post for the queen. So I don't think I think you could maybe just play bishop d7 if you wanted to as well. So knight e5 is maybe a little over the top, but all right. Look at that. All right, so bishop h4, g5, knight h5, double examine. I give minus plus, which I'm pretty sure. Older engines won't agree. Newer engines will. Older engines are gonna because the depth is worse. They're gonna bias they're gonna freak out because black's king is in the center, and then on the higher depth, so they're gonna say, hey, wait a minute, white's not mating black, and there's nothing white can do. And again, it has to do with, all right, these key central pawns control all the squares that the white pieces could get into, right? So there's nothing white can do. Rook d1, knight g3, and we've effectively solved the problem of our queen because there's no more pressure on the d6 square. So we can just, e5 is not going to work, especially after g4, because now knight comes to e5 and there's no threat of e5. So while our queen is in the sights, this is a case where d file is not opening anytime soon, so it doesn't matter. h5, and wow, you know, they show you all these games where, you know, white is getting a checkmating attack, you know, and play the Smith Mora, and well, it's move 15 and white is the one getting mated. So I think there's another really cool example of where I sometimes I say like bishops, because they're long range pieces, can sometimes be developed on their original squares. So, but the key thing is development here is not that important because the center is so stable in black's favor. Bishop g7 and just h4. And so white obviously this whole time is looking for, well, are there tactical, are there, you know, all right, are there tactical shots? Can I play the typical knight d5 Sicilian sacrifice? But it just wasn't to be because they don't work. Queen d2. And check, and now the black king, or excuse me, the white king is finding that it has very, very few places to go. King f1. Maybe queen f2 is objectively best, but obviously that's just an admission of failure, because just obviously black could just play queen f2 and play the endgame up a pawn and with the bishop pair and with an awesome knight on e5. King f1. Bishop d7 with a couple ideas, sometimes in some lines playing bishop b5 check, but also just developing. Rook d8, overprotecting d6. I guess if queen d6, there is wouldn't just queen to e3 with the idea of rook h1 check be sufficient? Knight knight fe2 or knight ce2. Yeah, that doesn't work. Just rook h1 check. Okay. Rook d8, king e2. Okay, so now maybe he's threatening queen d6, but knight f3 exclam, with the idea of if gf3, just rook h2, winning the queen. Queen d3, if queen d6, there's just knight d4 check. With a winning ending. Knight d4 check anyways. Check. Check. Knight ce2 is forced, because if knight fe2, then bishop h6 check, winning. So knight ce2, but now we get to now bishop b5. And now white is forced to say, okay, fine, I'll trade queens with you and try to hold on in the endgame, but not even that is going to work, because now e5, check, give me the exchange. I think if you don't even take the exchange, it's probably still a winning endgame for. I mean, you wouldn't play e5 if you're not going to take the exchange, because there's no reason to give white the d5 square. But this is a fantastic, even without this shot winning the exchange, this is a fantastic endgame for white. Or for black. Why do I keep messing the colors up? Two bishops versus two knights in an open board. White has an awful, awful. Pawn structure. Black is doing really well, but the exchange is the exchange. King d7, king e6. Yeah, you can have that pawn. Actually, it just helps my rooks. d5 and two connected pass pawns, so this is going to be game over in a few moves. Rook g5, and in fact, white playing one of the strongest players in the world at the time had seen enough. So yeah, when you know, there's been so much rating inflation that when being 2550 meant you were one of those, in 1972 meant you were one of the strongest players in the world, which means, to my mind, means like Fischer's achievement of a 2785 rating in 1972. I mean, there's no question. You know, as far as you know, when you talk about players to achieve highest rating, you know, in my book, it's not Magnus Carlsen by any stretch. I think that you can make an argument that it was either Garry Kasparov or Bobby Fischer, because, you know, the next highest rated player was, you know, almost 200 points below him, right? So it'd be like if, you know, or I mean, I guess I think, yeah, so like, you know, the highest rated player after him was like, he was like 2785, and the highest rated player after him was like 2650. So he was like 100 and some points above the next highest rated player. You know, Garry Kasparov of 2000 of achieving a rating of 2851, well, the next highest rated player is barely over 2700, you know. But to achieve a rating of 28, you know, 80 or whatever Carlsen peaked at, when there's lots of other 2800s, you know, again, your rating is going to inevitably reflect, you know, the ratings of your opponents. So, all right. So that's that game. Yeah, I don't even know if being 2550 is going to put you in the top 1,000 anymore. You know, I was saw GM Alonso Zapata giving a talk, and, you know, he was in the top 50 in the world, and he had like a rating of like 2,500. You know, back, and, you know, that was back in like the early 80s when there was less than 100 grandmasters in the entire world, right? And so now if you put someone that, you know, someone in the top 50 in the world, they're going to be 2750, you know, 2,700 something. So, all right. So let's see this other game. I like this one too. This is a Queen e2, Bishop g4. So this idea of Rook d1 rather than forcing h3 right away. e6. And then this Bishop f4. So this is really common. A lot of times they'll just try to line up on f4 as quickly as possible. So here, you can't let that stand. Usually you have to either take this bishop, or this queen needs to be already away from the d file so that you can play knight e5. So here, black kind of has to play knight h5. So, but that's okay. Knight h5 is good enough. If bishop g3, obviously, and just knight g3, and this is very similar to what we saw in the Evans game, except we didn't get the we didn't get the moves h6, g5 in, but we've solved the problem of the d file. So, and here you could probably even maybe play queen b6, because the queen might be safe there, because there's no bishop coming to e3 to do not, you know, we can that piece just doesn't exist, right? So knight e5, bishop b3, bishop f3. There's no reason to take this right away, but he takes this right away, and now queen h4. Now, as I said before in the theory, you can play a little more accurate to play b5 to delay the capture. Sorry, play a move like b5, and rook b8 to overprotect b5 and then take on f3 and then play queen h4. This is okay too. Queen h4, king g2. Now white should play bishop a4 check, and black can't play b4 because there's a profitable sack on b5, but we can just play king e7, and there's no, that's fine. Our king can just kind of be on e7. It's not an issue. And we're coming in with knight f4. We can play g5 and bishop g7. So this is fine. And if we turn the engine on, it's going to tell us that black is fine, or black is dead one actually, right? But king g2, bishop e7, just to not have to deal with any monkey business. Bishop g5, and black is just going to town on the weak squares. Otherwise, knight f4 check. Queen f6. Rook c8. g5. Rook g8. And again, king totally safe in the center. Because how does white profitably open the center? Well, it's sure as heck's not going to be with f4 and e5, I'll tell you that, right? And so here, I mean, it's kind of an early resignation maybe, but, you know, white is rated about a little less than 2,000, and black is a little less than 2,500. So obviously white is dead lost here, and black decided, you know, all right, I don't need to be embarrassed anymore by this either very strong IM or weaker GM. So he resigned. So is resigning in a lost position, but perhaps a bit early. But nonetheless, this demonstrates why I'm showing this game, and why I showed the last game, is to demonstrate that with this pawn shield on d6 and e6 and covering all these squares, and no profitable way for white to blast the center open. It doesn't matter if your king stays in there, and then white's pieces, all their entryways are cut off. All right, so that is a very easy system against the Smith-Mora. I think the key thing to focus on is, well, to this bishop g4 idea, and you know the key thing for white is to get pressure down the d file, to play bishop f4. So that's why we're playing a6, and so just don't let him play e5 if he's going to be able to exploit the pin. And other than that, once you get your play rolling, other than that, you have just better control of the center, because you have an extra center pawn, and white's pieces don't really have anything to say, because they're all shut out. And so, in fact, because of that, once white has some weaknesses, black can quickly take over the initiative, right? In this game and in the Smith-Evans game. Now, bishop f4 is the new move, but just to recap, it is in my view, it's a way to bail out of not to actually prove that white has any not positional, but anything to say in this position, because you're just saying, oh well, obviously you want to play bishop g4 and knight e5, so I'm just going to threaten to just create more simplifications. Well, you're the one who's down white's the one who's down a pawn, and so the fact is that white is already potentially in trouble here, because if you can't show anything for the extra pawn, yeah, you got to play bishop f4, but so what? right? And so just to review, let's go back to the theory file. You know, I said bishop f3, queen b8, and then you can bail out with bishop e2 if you want. Now, if you want more, you don't have to play bishop f3. You can play bishop h5. Queen b3, queen d7, and go for this kind of stuff. Now, I think this is like the super main line of the Smith-Mora Gambit now, because I think it's the most, well, it's the most up to date, and it's still by far not the most popular, but I've almost never seen this, but it is objective. What I do feel is the objectively best move. So I do want to make sure to present that so that you're prepared. But I would focus I would focus more on, you know, the bishop g4 ideas where he's not going to play bishop f4 and he's going to let you play knight e5. Right, and if he plays bishop g5 right away, then you can play e6 and h6 and g5. All right, well, thank you for watching this video. If I'm very confident that this is well done. If you think if you have any specific questions or on any lines or some comments, feel free to mention the variation in the comment section. I'll do my best to respond. So stay safe.